They were the wives of power, draped in silk, polished in pearls, worshipped as symbols of refinement. Society looked up at them from church pews and marveled at their manners, their gentleness, their so-called purity. But behind the heavy curtains of the plantation mansions, white mistresses ruled with cruelty. Their voices could condemn, their hands could punish, and their jealous obsessions could destroy. They carried dirty secrets, disturbing desires, and unspeakable powers that turned black men and women into pawns of their filthy hidden world. Listen closely, because this was not a rare story, not the whispers of a scandal here and there. This was systemic, woven into the very culture of slavery, in the echo of those grand parlors, in the shadowed staircases, in the secret chambers where eyes dared not wander. Mistresses played their own deadly game. And when the hand that claims to nurture becomes the hand that destroys, the results are more disturbing than most can bear to imagine. The 1700s, the 1800s, the peak of plantation culture in the American South and across the Caribbean. Wealth measured in sugar, cotton, tobacco, and human lives. From the outside, these plantations were symbols of elegance, mansions surrounded by white fences and manicured lawns, tea poured on the veranda, daughters trained in music and embroidery, the so-called jewels of civilization. But beneath the lace and laughter, they were built on bones and suffering, every polished tile held in place by blood. Society presented white mistresses as fragile guardians of morality. They were praised as the gentle balance to the master's authority, the angel of the home, the moral compass of culture. Yet in reality, many mistresses carried their own obsessions, jealousies, and cruel desires. Black men and women were trapped in a double cage, the master who owned them outright and the mistress who controlled their daily survival. And in her hands, power was often just as lethal. Imagine being forced to live under the gaze of a woman who saw you not as human, but as her rival. A woman who looked at your youth, your beauty, your very existence, and decided you were a threat. Imagine being a black man whose smallest glance or polite word could be twisted into accusation, humiliation, or a death sentence. Imagine being a black woman who bore the wrath of a mistress not for what you did, but for what she feared you might represent. This was not only control, this was cruelty made intimate. This was the nasty truth about the so-called ladies of culture. Masters ruled in law, but mistresses ruled in the household. Every meal prepared, every bed made, every infant's cry silenced. It was the mistress who gave orders. She supervised punishments, she decided who worked in the parlor and who was banished to the fields. She decided which child was sold to settle a debt. Power disguised itself in femininity, but the iron fist was always present. Slavery gave white women a tool most societies denied them: absolute command over other human beings. They could not always control their husbands, their futures, or their own place in patriarchy. But they could control enslaved people with devastating precision. Black women were punished not just for real mistakes, but for imagined glances, for clothing that was too fitting, for the crime of being young in a house where the master's eye wandered. Black men were punished for imagined insolence, for standing too tall, for daring to exist as masculine under a mistress's watchful eye. Children became leverage. Enslaved mothers were reminded that one word of disobedience could cost them their babies. Mistresses could send a child to the auction block without flinching, punishing a woman through the most heartbreaking cruelty imaginable. And the enslaved understood this, that their lives were always one jealous glance, one suspicious whisper away from ruin. But control was never enough. Some mistresses carried obsessions that turned cruelty into ritual. Behind locked doors, the filthy, hidden world revealed itself. Some used whips themselves, taking grim satisfaction in the cries of the women they punished. Others inflicted punishments like confinement, isolation, or starvation. Slow torments that broke the body and spirit without leaving obvious marks for society to see. Jealousy became a weapon. If a husband looked too long at a young enslaved woman, suspicion alone could unleash a fury of violence. Women were beaten, mutilated, or worked to death, not for anything they had chosen, but for what a mistress imagined. Their bodies bore scars of jealous rage. Their spirits crushed beneath punishment meant to erase not just their presence, but their very existence as women. Mistresses also turned their eyes toward enslaved men. Publicly, they were forbidden. Privately, the lines blurred in disturbing and dangerous ways. Some mistresses engaged in psychological games, mocking, degrading, taunting men who could not defend themselves. A smile could be a trap. A glance could be twisted into evidence of disrespect. Others carried unspeakable obsessions, secret desires cloaked in shame and cruelty. A mistress's word could ruin a man's life, accuse him of advances he never made, or worse, lure him into intimacy only to betray him with deadly consequences. And in some households, there were hidden chambers, spaces where no master's eyes would wander, where mistresses carried out punishments far from witness. Lace curtains, velvet drapes, locked doors, and behind them, a world of domination that society never saw. Behind gentility, a darkness thrived. Behind silken gloves, claws were sharpened. Behind the facade of genteel womanhood, the filthy, hidden world of the mistress was alive. Women broken by envy, men shattered by false accusations. These were the victims of the mistress's wrath. Enslaved women lived knowing that their beauty, their youth, even their silence could become a weapon turned against them. They were punished not for their choices, but for the choices forced upon them. Their lives reduced to shadows of jealousy, their dignity stripped away in the name of preserving a mistress's pride. The result was heartbreak beyond measure. For men, the torment was just as disturbing. Imagine being accused of insolence simply for existing in your own skin. Imagine being forced to endure mocking, humiliation, and threats that no refusal could escape. To resist was to invite punishment. To comply was to lose your humanity. Every glance, every movement, every word was a potential trap. They lived in constant fear, knowing the mistress's voice alone could condemn them to torture or death. Children bore the cruelest scars of all. Enslaved mothers watched helplessly as their babies were torn from their arms, sold to distant markets, punished for no crime but the rage of a mistress who sought revenge. Families shattered in an instant, fathers broken as their sons were auctioned away, daughters left vulnerable to the same cycle of cruelty. Generations lived under the shadow of this torment. The scars were not just physical, they were etched into memory, whispered in lullabies, carved into the very culture of survival. Psychological torment spread like poison. To live under constant humiliation, where even your smallest smile could be seen as defiance, was to live without safety. Dignity was not stolen in one act. It was stripped away piece by piece. Some endured silently, protecting loved ones by sacrificing themselves. Others resisted in ways history rarely recorded, only to pay with their lives. The torment of the mistress was not just physical, it was emotional warfare, a constant reminder that survival meant silence. And yet, even in silence, the truth finds its way to the surface. Slave narratives crack the mask wide open. Harriet Jacobs, in her painful testimony, revealed the torment not just of masters, but of their wives, the jealous mistresses who turned her life into a battlefield. Others whispered their experiences into memoirs, letters, and oral histories. These testimonies exposed the reality. Mistresses were not innocent bystanders. They were enforcers. They were perpetrators. They carried dirty secrets wrapped in lace gloves. Enslaved communities preserved the memory of these cruelties in whispered stories. Around fires, in songs, in the coded words passed down through generations, the truth was kept alive. They remembered the mistress's wrath, and in doing so, preserved the part of history white society tried desperately to erase. Sometimes the mask cracked in unexpected places. Letters and journals belonging to mistresses revealed obsessions too strong to hide. Writings about jealousy, about hatred, even about disturbing desires toward enslaved men, exposed the hypocrisy of women portrayed as symbols of purity. And now with DNA evidence, another layer of the facade crumbles. Genetic links prove that forced intimacy was not limited to masters. Some mistresses acted on hidden desires, and the bloodlines they denied are now undeniable. The facade of gentility dissolves when the record is examined closely. The myths collapse. The truth bleeds through. At the time, society denied it. White women were painted as the victims, fragile flowers harmed by their husband's unfaithfulness. They were never cast as villains, never accused of cruelty, never held accountable for their obsessions. Instead, enslaved women were branded as temptresses, enslaved men as predators, their lives destroyed to preserve the lie of white innocence. Even today, history resists these revelations. Plantation museums sanitize their tours, textbooks gloss over the cruelty of mistresses. Scholars for decades avoided the uncomfortable truths about women's complicity. It is easier to imagine cruelty as a man's act alone, but the reality, disturbing, filthy, unspeakable, is that the mistress was often just as dangerous. Why? Why did women shielded by society, praised for purity, indulge in such cruelty? Theories cut to the bone. Some acted out of jealous rage, punishing enslaved women who had no choice in attracting a master's attention. Others were obsessed with power, intoxicated by control in a world where patriarchy denied them authority. For some, the repression of their own sexuality turned to projection, fixating on enslaved men as forbidden objects of both desire and disgust. And some, perhaps the most disturbing of all, acted from a psychological hunger for cruelty itself. The system of slavery bred obsession, hypocrisy, and depravity. The face of cruelty was not only male. It wore bonnets and pearls. It whispered prayers in church pews. It smiled across dinner tables while hiding scars inflicted the night before. Were these women victims of patriarchy or villains in their own right? The answer is not simple, but history is not clean. It is filthy. And in that filth, truth festers. Imagine it now, a candle flickering in an empty plantation room. Shadows stretch across the walls. The air holds the faint echo of chains, the muffled sound of weeping long gone. This is where cruelty lived. This is where obsessions turned into punishments, where jealousy became blood. The filthy, hidden world of white mistresses was never about love, never about weakness. It was about power, about dominance, about a system that allowed unspeakable acts to thrive beneath the mask of culture and refinement. Their cruelty broke lives, their obsessions destroyed families, and their dirty secrets scarred generations. History often paints them as victims, trapped, powerless, innocent. But the truth is far darker. They were enforcers. They were participants. They were architects of torment. And their secrets are a disturbing reminder that cruelty wears many faces, even the face of a lady. The hidden world of the mistress is no longer hidden. The filthy lies are exposed, and the truth, however disturbing, will not be silenced again.